Islam and sort of an approach on that. So if you could all give him your undivided attention. Dr. Mozaffar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem amma ba'd. We express our praise and gratitude to Allah Ta'ala, and we seek blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm sort of technologically illiterate, even though I used to work in IT like every other brown person in the world. And so I just quickly set up this new computer. And so hopefully everything will work and things will look really, really nice and state of the art and all that stuff. So yeah, as Ahsan mentioned, we talk about science, COVID, and an Islamic approach. And to talk about to address the problem, what is the issue that is at stake? Number one, in my assessment, Muslims struggle to find a way to address the various questions of life. And what I mean by that is that we've been conditioned through Sunday school and through other sources that the answer to everything comes down to, is this halal or is this haram? And that only focuses on action. And it reduces Islam quite a bit from what it actually offers us to just the strict set of rules that are to be followed. And so that's one of the points we're going to be addressing. And then further, there's a common notion that Muslims are conditioned to think that their worldviews clash, so that science, modernity, and Islam cannot be reconciled. And often, you know, when you hear people saying, look, Islam talks about, or the Quran talks about the embryo 1400 years before humans discovered the phases of the embryo, think about what is actually being said. What a person thinks they're saying is, look, Islam is great, Islam is from God, but what is actually being stated is that Islam, science is a higher authority than the Quran, because we're trying to justify Islam through science. And then the other issue on this topic becomes, all right, can I actually live as a Muslim fully in a life that is relevant to this world and still be a full Muslim? And the common notion is that no, you can't. And so our outline is as follows. First, we're going to talk about science and then what scientism is. And when we talk about science and scientism, we do have to also talk about conspiracy theories. And then we're also going to briefly talk about what would be an Islamic approach. Now, I didn't say an Islamic approach to what. The real point here is science as it relates to reality, scientism as it relates to reality, conspiracy theories as they relate to reality. And then by extension, what is an Islamic approach to negotiating and navigating reality? So a lot of the talk is actually going to sound theoretical, but the intention is to give you tools on how to navigate your life. And then as you get stronger and stronger tools, when we get to the actual scenarios of dealing with COVID-19 vaccines and things like that, you'll have some built-in tools on how to address a lot of these questions. As opposed to being caught up in anxiety, you know, what do I believe, who do I follow, so forth, and so on. And our goal is probably to talk about for maybe give or take about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and then I'll open up the floor, inshallah, for questions from there. And so jumping right in, when we speak of science, hopefully you saw the cool special effects. In other words, science is orange there. What is science in a very simple nutshell? Science is a study of the observable patterns of the world. So it's basically saying that the academy, which is based on science, which organizes itself according to science, is trying to answer one simple question, which is how does the world work? And so then we divide the world into the non-human realm and the human realm. And within that, the physical realm and life sciences. And then we have the subfields, physics and chemistry, biology, anatomy, physiology, and then the human understandings. We have anthropology, psychology, sociology, political science, economics, and there are others. These are the big ones. Now, again, when you're looking at what is on the screen here, what is the point that we're making? That when you're going to university, for example, when you're going to Benedictine or you're going to Loyola or another school, you are entering a world that has a very specific worldview. And by worldview, what do we mean? An understanding of how reality operates. And the university is saying, we are studying how the world works. Okay. To help make sense of that, in contrast, if you were to go to a traditional Islamic madrasa, and we'll touch on this when we get to the Islamic approach, you're answering a different question. The question you're answering there is, what does Allah, what does God want from me? So at the university, how does the world work? That is the fundamental question around which your entire university is organized. And then at the madrasa, it's, what does Allah want from me? And that is the question around which the entire curriculum there is organized. And so how do you figure out how does the world work? We have this thing called science, and then we have these categories. Now you're going to notice there's a number of majors that are not on this list. For example, art is not here, philosophy is not here, literature is not here. And what is the point here? That if something is not defining how does the world work according to patterns, then it gets relegated to the arts and literature. Yeah. Otherwise, the default is the sciences. And so we're saying through physics, matter operates according to some patterns. Chemistry, matter operates according to some patterns. And then in the life sciences, that the animal world and the flora, the fauna operate according to some patterns, likewise for anatomy and physiology. And then the human sciences are saying the same thing, that humans operate in patterns that we can identify. So anthropology would be looking at what are their cultural patterns. Psychology would be looking at behavior. Sociology is how do people organize themselves. We find patterns here too. Political science will relate to governance, like spending, commerce, all of those things. But what is the key point here? That the world operates in patterns. Now, what is interesting here is that when we look in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala is also saying the same thing, that Allah Ta'ala is telling us that the sun and moon follow particular patterns that you can use to then create your calendar. Okay? And then when we speak about behaviors in the Quran, whether we talk about the behavior of a believer, you will find believers doing this. You will find hypocrites doing this. You will find rejectors of faith doing this. We can see there's some overlap there, that there's also patterns through this Islamic lens. Now, a big word is, of course, missing on this screen, and that is God. That for science, because it is focused on the observable, God is not observable. Angels are not observable. Jinns are not observable. I mean, of course, you can have the effect of jinns and all of that. I mean, we could probably have a whole field of just, what are patterns in Muslim stories about jinns and such, but that would perhaps be either in anthropology or psychology. But the point here, again, is that is the default of the education you're all getting. If you grow up in public school, if you go through university like now, this is how you're being conditioned to look at the world. Good. But then we have this next thing, that what is deeper, that science relies on a number of things. Science relies on theories. I come up with an idea, here's how water functions. I come up with an idea, here's how humans behave. Here's how a minority population behaves when it's dealing with a majority population. And then I go through my experiments, I discover data, and I might develop formulas. And if I can reproduce this, then we might start using words like theories and laws and such. So now we're getting it a little bit deeper. How does science operate? It's always looking for theories. So it's always looking for data. Now, one issue that comes up when we speak about COVID-19 for the past 13 months, in fact, let's go further, past about 16 months. I'll tell you an interesting story. I have a friend who lives in Australia. He's originally from the Philippines and he moved to Australia for work. And he sent me an email regarding his coworker. His coworker is Chinese, and his coworker told him that his relatives in Wuhan, China, have all gotten sick by some mystery plague. And the government is keeping it quiet, and we need to let the whole world know. And that email he sent me was January 22nd of last year. It wasn't until March that we went into quarantine. I mean, that's a side point. But how much did we know about COVID-19 in terms of data? We had a small amount in January, and then we had a larger amount in March, and then we had a much larger amount in July, and then even larger in September, and then much, much larger in January to now. But what does that mean? That based on our data, every time we're getting more data, the theories are changing. So one of the criticisms that you often see by people who are skeptical of all this in terms of the conspiracy realm is that, look, here's what Dr. Fauci says here, and here's what Dr. Fauci says here, and here's what Dr. Fauci says here, or here's what the CDC says here, and here's a contradiction, and here's a contradiction. But what they're overlooking is the fact that with each month, we had significantly more data, which means our theories looked like they changed, but they actually became more accurate because we began to see patterns in how COVID-19 behaves. We began to see patterns in how COVID-19 behaves in different populations as we got more data. And so science will often change as we get more data. And even another way to think about this is if you were to study the whole history of the models of the universe, compare 2020 with 1820, with 1020, you and I all know that the models changed. We had the geocentric theory, heliocentric theory. Right now, there's no sense of a center of the universe and such. And even when the Hubble telescope went out in space, we thought most of space was empty space, and then we saw billions upon billions of galaxies, what to think of stars and such. And so this is part of the goal of science. It relies on exploration. It relies on looking deeper and deeper into whatever field to find more and more information. Good. Now here's something else interesting. What is the Quran also telling us? What is Allah telling us in the Quran? Go travel the world and look. On the one hand, go travel the world and look at Allah's creation. This is in Surah Al-Mulk, the 67th surah, and see if you can find a flaw. Keep looking and looking and looking. Your eyes will fail you before you can actually find a flaw. And further, what does the Quran say? Go look and look and look across the world so you can also learn from the history of people who came before you. You know, whether we're talking about the pyramids or whether we're talking about the mummies, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in Egypt in the past couple of days about that. We're looking at other generations that have come and gone. And so the Quran is also telling us go explore. And so then likewise, science, as part of the process of exploration, is seeking discovery. So it has a thirst. And the thirst, on the one hand, is to try to understand how the world operates, but the deeper thirst is the thirst for discovery. And the word we have for this is curiosity. And a point to think about in terms of the Islamic construction of the person. You have a mind, you have a body, you have a heart. And then overall, you have a soul. And the body has an innate thirst. And what is that thirst? It's physical connection. And so we're going to learn a lot about COVID-related illnesses because of quarantine, because people have not been getting the physical connection. Okay? The body has a thirst, physical connection. The mind has a thirst, which is curiosity. Okay? And the heart has a thirst, which is a thirst for intimacy, intimacy with other people, intimacy with the world, intimacy especially with God. Okay? And so what am I saying here? That we have a notion in our greater society that curiosity killed the cat. Not in our tradition. Curiosity is central to our tradition. The process of learning, the process of discovering. But what is the thirst that is most quenching, the most quenched? It is when you have connection with Allah, when you have connection with God. Meaning, what is the deepest quenching of the thirst of the heart, which is the thirst for intimacy? It is a connection with God, a personal connection between you and God. And think about this, all those of you who make your prayers, whether you make them 5 times a day or irregularly, when you're talking to God, are you speaking from your heart? Or are you just going through the motions? Please give me A's, please get me through such and such. And the deepest satisfaction of the curiosity of the mind is knowledge of God, which is deeply related to knowledge of reality. You find a satisfaction when you have a deeper understanding of reality. And then the true satisfaction of the body is physical connection with God. That does not happen in this world. That happens on the other side, where the greatest pleasure of the human experience will be in paradise, seeing God with our own eyes. But the point here is that discovery is central to our experience as people. Discovery is central to the Islamic outlook. And something that has been lost in Islamic study is critical analysis. And what do I mean by this? That a central part of Islamic learning is rote memorization, become hafiz of the Quran, memorize it all. Now, it's interesting, a side point to give you an idea of the decline of civilization. Today, when we speak of someone who is a hafiz or a hafiza, we're saying that they memorize the whole Quran. If we had this conversation 200 years ago, someone who is a hafiz is someone who's memorized the whole Quran and all of Bukhari and all of Muslims, these hadith collections with all the chains of transmission. And someone who only had the Quran memorized, back then we called a qari. Today, a hafiz is someone who has the Quran memorized, and a qari is someone who recites. And that's beside the point. What I'm illustrating is that in the whole process of Islamic learning, we've been taking steps and steps and steps lower. And something that's been lost is the process of critical analysis. That when you're given teachings about the deen, study them, analyze them. You're not going to break the deen because the author of the deen is smarter than you and I. We're invited, go, push, push, push. Not only are you not going to find a flaw in the creation of the universe, you're not going to find a flaw in the deen if you use your full critical abilities. So I hope one point you're getting is that there is a whole lot of overlap between that which we call science and that which we call Islam, without me even getting into the Islam part of the discussion. But there is one difference here, and that is that science also relies very much on skepticism. That I do not take something as true unless I can prove that it's true. I do not take something as true unless you can prove that it's true to me. And this is a pushback against old religion, which was only focused on blind belief. So some of the growth of science, as we go through the evolution of Aristotle from the natural sciences to the Enlightenment and the rise of empirical philosophy, leading to the modern era of science, there's also pushback against religion, saying that religion is teaching us a whole bunch of things that we can't prove, or religion is teaching us a whole bunch of things that are wrong. And they're speaking primarily not of Islam, they're speaking of religion in terms of as they're experiencing it. And so skepticism is also a big part of scientific thought. And that's why you'll find many scientists who are, for example, atheists, or scientists who don't buy into any religion, because skepticism is also a big part of all of that. Okay. Now, having spoken about science, let's talk about scientism. Now, what is scientism? Scientism is an ideology. So science is referring to those fields of study. Scientism is an ideology where you believe science can answer all the questions of the world, where you believe that science can fix all of the problems of the world, where you believe that science can bring innovations to continuously improve the human experience. Now, has science brought innovations that improve the human experience? Absolutely. The fact that you and I are speaking here to each other, you and I are facing each other. Actually, you're facing me. I can't see everybody on my screen. I mean, this is a result of science. This is not the result of people all getting together praying, hey, will Allah please give us Wi-Fi. And so obviously, it does bring innovations. Does it fix problems? It does provide some solutions, but the increase in the quality, for example, of medicine. If you Benedictine students are like my Loyola students, then 90% of you are pre-meds. And then of the 10%, most of you are post-pre-meds. And so you're all studying medicine and all that stuff for whatever noble reasons, inshallah. And so the evolution of medicine over the centuries has been something that's brought better and better health to people. But can it bring answers to all the questions? We'll see a pushback on that in just a moment. So deeper, scientism is the process of giving authority to science over all other approaches. So I made the point a few moments ago that if you find yourself arguing the proof of the truth of Islam is that the Quran talks about embryos 1,300 years, 1,400 years before humanity actually saw those phases. Like I said, what you've done is you've given science higher authority over the Quran itself. Yeah. But that's understandable as a starting point of faith. If your faith does not grow beyond that, then your faith is going to remain weak. Yeah. And keep that point in mind. If you find yourself falling back on that and similar teachings, then your faith is going to be shaky. You need to develop your faith further. And we'll talk about that when we get into the Islamic approach. But the era of scientism is synonymous with the modern era. The modern era, give or take, begins around the 1700s, and then it sort of starts to end around 1945, because what took place in 1945, we completed World War II. And the postmodern movement began to rise. And the postmodern movement argued that, yes, science can do great things in terms of bringing medicine, but science can also be used to make bombs. That science can bring all kinds of healing to the human experience, but science can also bring all kinds of destruction to the human experience. And what I urge all of you to do, if you get a moment, and you can even do it right now while you're listening to me, pretending to listen to me, is go look at the civilian casualties in World War I and World War II, and look at the total casualties of World War I and World War II. It will shock you how many people were killed. And weaponry produced by technology was a part of that. And so the postmodern movement is pushing the argument that science can give us facts, but it cannot give us values. And we're still in this postmodern impulse right now, trying to figure out where we go, and we still haven't figured that out. So that's scientism. Now I have to speak about conspiracies, especially in the context of COVID. So every one of us has those uncles who spread every single possible conspiracy theory about COVID, that it's a 5G conspiracy theory, or it's a consequence of 5G, or it's made in a lab, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what are conspiracy theories? Number one, they are attempts to uncover alleged truths that are being kept hidden by secret power brokers. So you have the Illuminati that is trying to control the world, and then they make all these things happen to make all of us submit. Yeah. Is there an Illuminati? Maybe. I don't think I've ever met them. I like to tell people above the Illuminati, there's these Pakistani aunties that we call Desi aunties, and they're even tougher than the Illuminati. But anyway, I have just as much proof of that as you do of the Illuminati. Zero. And so that's part of the idea of conspiracy theories. Look, there's a secret plan. There's a Zionist conspiracy to control everything. There's a Wahhabi conspiracy to try to control everything. And thus they're trying to predict tomorrow's news so they can say, aha, I told you so. But who preaches the conspiracy theories? Often power brokers themselves are the ones that are preaching conspiracy theories. And the easiest example of that is the presidency of Donald Trump. And think of all the conspiracy theories he would preach. Okay, that Islam hates us, that Muslims hate us, Muslim ban, okay, that all of these migrants coming from the South are trying to steal all of our jobs, put a wall up. Okay. And then on top of that, you had people who were having protests in Charlottesville, and I forgot the term that they used for it, and saying the Jews are not going to replace us. That often it's actually pharaohs that are preaching conspiracy theories. Okay. But on the other hand, there are also people who are powerless, who also feel that this becomes their exertion of power to preach conspiracy theories. Look, I found the hidden truth, and now all of us should follow it. And so the preachers of conspiracy theories, they rely on distrust. They want you to distrust everything. Okay. Distrust everything, trust me. That's exactly how the Pharaoh behaves. And the assumption is that you have these secret forces that are lying. And the secret forces could be, the Illuminati, or it could be the secret conspiracy of Muslims that are trying to take over the world. I mean, I speak over the years, I've spoken at many, many churches, and you'd be surprised how many people believe that Muslims are in this big secret conspiracy to take over the world. And I would have to tell them that, okay, number one, if you know about it, then it's obviously not a good secret. Number two, if this is what we're doing, we're obviously not really doing a good job of it. Or maybe that's just wrong. Okay. And part of the assumption is that everyone except you is a fool, you being the preacher of the conspiracy theory. Okay. That I know, all you guys don't know, you guys are all sheeple. And so this is part and parcel about the conspiracy theory, and they rely upon fringe data. So here's 90 sources that say, here's the real story of COVID-19, and they all agree. And then here's one source that says those 90 sources are wrong. This is the hallmark of conspiracy theories over and over again. But the deeper point about conspiracy theories is that you will rarely ever see the people who speak about conspiracy theories changing their own behavior. They will instead very often be YouTube warriors, and search and search and search. In my life, I've met one person, who's actually long since passed away, who would preach conspiracy theories about this or that population, but actually dedicated his life to improving society so that the conspirators don't win. So conspiracy theories fundamentally are what? They're fantasies. So having said all of that, now let's get into an Islamic approach. And the foundation for this is the Hadith of Jibreel. So at one level, and this I think the Muslims all know, but hopefully I'm putting it in a particular order for you. At one level, Islam is founded on obedience. Okay. And this is straight from the Quran. This is in Surah 4, Surah An-Nisa, around Ayah 59. So obedience to God, obedience to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and obedience to appropriate authorities. And the core for our focus for now is obedience to God and obedience to the Prophet. Meaning God says do, so we try to do. The Prophet says do, peace be upon him, and so we try to do. God says don't, so we don't. The Prophet says don't, so we don't. Okay. That is the level that we call the Islam level. That is for a passing grade. But then you and I, as Muslims, are invited to grow from Islam to Iman. And what is happening is a shift in what motivates us. We are shifting from obedience to God, obedience to the Prophet, peace be upon him, to full, complete trust. This is in Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th surah, right around the middle of the surah. That at one level you're obeying. Why? Because you have to. But the level you want to get to is that you have such thorough trust in Allah and the Prophet, peace be upon him, that you internally feel compelled to do what it takes to get closer to Allah in the model of the Prophet, peace be upon him. You are literally changing your understanding of reality. And so that is also not the deepest level. We are further invited to progress from Iman to Ihsan. And what is Iman to Ihsan? You probably know the narration where you're worshiping Allah as though you see him. But let's define these words for a second. If Islam is founded on obedience, we call it obedience, we call it submission. Iman, as we're defining it here, is to have such a level of security in your being that people feel secure just by being in your company. This is Iman. We often translate as faith or belief. When you're getting deeper into the meaning, you have such a level of security that people feel secure just by being in your company. So to put it in perspective, my dear undergrads, ask yourselves how many of you suffer from anxiety. Okay? And what is anxiety? And I say this because so many of my loyal students suffer from anxiety. And what is anxiety? The anxiety is the question, what if everything falls apart? So anxiety is, okay, I've taken an exam. What if I fail? I'm applying to med school. What if I don't get in? What if doom? What if doom? What if doom? That is a trick of shaitan. Because what is that question actually saying? What if I should not trust Allah? And Iman means you've now reached a point of full trust in Allah, which means you have full trust that even though Allah is going to give you struggle, he's never going to give you anything you can't handle, and he's always there, present. And whatever he hits you with is designed specifically for you to help you grow. And then what is trust in the Prophet, peace be upon him? That when you follow his way, you'll be focused directly on God. Okay. So moving from Iman to Ihsan, from having this innate security, Ihsan is perfection of belief, perfection of faith. Okay. Where everything you do, your whole complete ontology, your whole complete being is focused on God. And so what does that mean? If I'm at the Islam level and I'm speaking to you right now, I'm speaking to you as me, Professor Mozaffar, talking to Benedictine students and others. If I'm at the Iman level, I'm speaking to you with the confidence that even if something doesn't work in this technology, the mission will still be accomplished and things will be good, inshallah. And then if I'm at the Ihsan level, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to Allah Ta'ala. Even though my face is talking to you. And then you, by the questions you bring forth, Allah Ta'ala is through you asking me these questions. And so it is complete. Every bit of you is focused on God. And so what are we saying? That scientism is an approach to reality and Islam is an approach to reality. So what do we say? Islam is actually, sorry, this is a repeat. Oh, right there at the bottom. The last point, that the picture is completed by saying that the Muslim is reminded that there is a greater reality beyond this temporal world. Those of you who are familiar with the hadith of Jibril, the angel Gabriel, is asking the Prophet, peace be upon him, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, and then asks about the day of judgment. And so as real as this world is, you know, my desk is on, my desk is this wooden desk. As real as this desk is, the next world is more real than this desk. And what does that mean? You and I will be facing God for the choices we made in this life. So this, I think, is essentially Islam 101, Islam 102. All of you understand this. But we're putting this together to help compare the two. So on the one hand, we have Islam. On the other hand, we have scientism. So Islam is a worldview. And what did I say a worldview is? It's an understanding of how reality operates. Scientism is a worldview. It is an understanding of how reality operates. But Islam is also saying it's truth whether you embrace it or not. It is the truth, whether you believe it or not. Whether you believe in it wholeheartedly or partially, it is still truth. But within it, what else are we saying? That your existence is 100% purposeful and valued. Now consider what I'm saying here, that because God has created you, by definition, you have value. And because God has created you with the purpose of even holding you to account, he has given you a purpose for existence. Your existence is not arbitrary. And part of this is that God is focused on you nonstop, especially when you are focused on God. And so everything that happens in your life is by design for you. So let's say you're driving somewhere today, you get a flat tire. That was specifically designed to happen at that moment for you. And that is literally every moment of your whole life. But what is the outlook in scientism? Your existence is arbitrary. That the current theory is that we had the Big Bang, and then everything's growing from there. The universe is growing. We had quark soup, and then we had the eventual formation of planets and galaxies and such. And then at some point in there, we have the creation of life and the evolution of life. And then somewhere in there, you know, your great grandfather, your great ancestors started coming along. And then somewhere in there, you're born. And then somewhere in the process, you're going to die. And maybe you'll have descendants, maybe not, but you're eventually going to become fertilizer. And your existence is 100% arbitrary. It's chance. So I kept making the point about how science and Islam overlap, but here's a place, especially where scientism and Islam are in complete contradiction. That if you're being truly honest through a scientific lens, if you're being truly honest through an atheist lens, your existence is fundamentally irrelevant. Which means you could dedicate your time in this world to helping people, you're going to die with the same result, you become fertilizer. You could dedicate your life in this world to exploiting people, and you're still going to die and become fertilizer. And so then how would Islam look at science? It would look at science as the study of Allah's patterns, sorry for the typo, Allah's patterns in creation. So I mentioned that when we were talking about science, there's no mention of God in chemistry, God in physics, God in biology, so forth and so on. When I'm looking through the lens of a believer and I'm exploring the world and I'm thinking, look at how amazing this design is, even with the anomalies, that look at how the patterns are that Allah has put in the world. So we're saying science can be a tool through which to appreciate God. But from the scientific view, looking back on Islam, religion is negligible. If your existence is negligible, then Islam itself is negligible. But what's common in both of them is that they do rest and trust in authority. And what I mean by authority here, I mean by experts. So for example, if you have questions on how to grow in Islam, you're better off finding some experts who can help you, who can guide you, either as teachers or as mentors. Or if you have a question about something specific, like COVID-19, go to an expert that you trust. Likewise, in the scientific outlook, that, all right, should I believe this physician or should I believe this YouTube warrior? I'm trusting one or the other, or neither. You can't really trust both because they often contradict each other. But they do both rest on trust in authority, which is now bringing us to the last part. So what have I given you? I've given you some outlooks on how to look at the world. And so this brings us to COVID-19 and vaccines. And don't worry, there's no more slides here. This is the end. So we have all this data amassed now in terms of COVID-19. And then we have experts that are prescribing what to do. And so many of those experts are saying, all right, take the vaccines. Now, from the Muslim lens, we also have teachings of plagues that, all right, when there's a plague, lock it up. If you're stuck in the town of a plague, don't leave. If there's a plague at the next town, do not enter the town. But there is a principle in Islamic law that health must be preserved, that if you're sick, you take medicine. And so that becomes the vaccine. So the question is, do I trust the vaccine? But then we have the conspiracy theorist, the YouTube warrior who says, look, I found this one random article and I found that one random article. So the fundamental question becomes, who do you trust? Do you trust the physician who says, take the vaccine? And so I had a very close friend of mine yesterday who asked this exact question. He's my age. He's very knowledgeable in Islam. And he says, I want to get the vaccine, but I see all these articles and they scare me. And I made the exact point that I'm making to you, that you turn to somebody who is an expert that you trust. In my case, my brother-in-law is a physician up in Milwaukee. And so I took his trust, and so then I got my Pfizer. But the point is, ask yourself, in terms of medicine, are there people that you trust? And if you're not totally sure, get a second opinion. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, okay, what about the halalness of the ingredients? And so there are all these articles coming out about embryos, like tissues from embryos or tissues coming from pork. So then you also look at the Islamic expert that you trust. One of the blessings of living in Chicago, we call it Chicago Sharif, is that Sheikh Amin Holwadia, not too far away from Benedictine, who runs Dar al-Qasim, is literally one of the global experts on Islamic bioethics. And he has his prescriptions, his fatwas on the vaccines, and you can go to the Dar al-Qasim website on finding it. But for our purposes, what would I really like you to consider? Good. One point I already mentioned is, in matters like this, on the secular side, on the scientific side, whom do you put your trust in? It's perfectly fine to have a worry. What if they're wrong? That's what trust is. Okay. But then in terms of your Islamic growth, whom do you trust? Do you have a scholar that you trust? And I'm distinguishing between a scholar and a celebrity preacher. If the person is not living in your zip code, or if the person is not living in your general area, they probably can't actually help you very much, except with general answers. So you might like this or that celebrity preacher. I'm kind of infamous in terms of my work with celebrity preachers and such. But the point is that, is there someone in your world that you trust? And then going deeper. In the academy, it's very easy for you to grow in your knowledge of science, especially if you're a pre-med, mashallah. But in your Islamic outlook, we said that this is truth, whether I believe it or not, and there's a deadline, there's a day of judgment coming. What are the efforts that you're taking to grow in your Islam? Which then means what? What are the efforts that you're taking to get closer to God? Which means what? What are the efforts that you're taking to understand reality for what it truly is? This was one of the du'as of the Prophet, may peace be upon him. Oh Allah, show me the reality of things as they are. Allahumma arini haqiqati ashya kama hiya. And so as you are getting closer to reality, as you are getting closer to God, you are also going to have deeper visceral happiness. And at the end of the day, that's the basic goal in life. So with that, I hope I've given you some tools on how to understand the ideas that are around us, as well as the contradictory ideas, and to also see where do things overlap, and where do things differ with each other. And so that is the end of my presentation, and I will open up the floor for any questions about anything at all. So I don't know, Ahsan, if you can like run that part, let me know, or someone else. So with that, I hope that this was of benefit. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.
Yeah, so if you guys just want to go ahead and either use the chat or you can use your mic, and the floor is open, like you said, if you have any questions regarding any of the topics we spoke on.
Please, anything at all. And so in the same way I mentioned that curiosity is part of your design, let your curiosity run through. Fire away. Usually what it takes is for somebody to break the ice. And then people start realizing, oh yeah, I have a question.
I mean, I'll start it off then. I just had a question on when you did your comparison slide. What would you say was the scientism's approach towards Islam?
Mm-hmm. I would say essentially that from a scientific approach, religion in itself is all invented. And so Islam is invented. And so Islam becomes one idea among many on how to live your life. And so it's neither more valid nor less valid than Christianity, neither more valid nor less valid than capitalism, neither more valid nor less valid than nihilism, where you just don't have any rules. Right?
For sure, that makes sense.
But if any of those things obstruct the growth of science, then that's a different issue. So one question, J&J repeatedly uses fetal cell lines for their vaccine research and design. Should we take it as Muslims? And so this, I would refer you to Sheikh Amin's fatwa. And I don't know if that is true about J&J, Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, then I believe Sheikh Amin would say to go for a different vaccine. But I would refer you to darulqasim.org, and they have the fatwa there. I don't think they give an endorsement to a specific vaccine or not, but they do raise the issue of fetal cells. Good question. Other questions?
Yeah, Salam, I have a question.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. So I remember earlier, like you brought up, you said like if something in nature has like an observable pattern, then it can come under science, and if it doesn't, it can be art. Is that to say art doesn't have patterns?
I would say if it's the study of the patterns in art, then it becomes a science, right? So that's what digital humanities are all about. It's this growing field looking for patterns in arts and literature. But art in itself is not trying to give you patterns. Art is trying to express, the human experience and such. Literature is often trying to express the human experience. But someone else would come along and say, all right, here's patterns we find in Shakespeare. Here's patterns we find in Iqbal's poetry, so forth and so on. Then it becomes a science. Let's see. Can the scope of someone's worldview prevent them from seeing science as a tool of Allah? Absolutely. Because the one question becomes, and this is a question for all of you to think about, is when I truly think of Allah, where is Allah located for me? Is Allah located in my imagination? Is Allah as real for me as the computer screen that I'm looking at? And part of your growth is to make Allah the only reality, as though I'm the illusion. That's the growth, where you're going from Allah being a concept that you take as real, to seeing Allah as a reality, to seeing yourself, to seeing Allah as the only reality, and everything else is the illusion. So my worldview can prevent that from happening. So thus, when we speak of science, then what happens? That if my journey through science is to appreciate the wonder of Allah, based purely on what Allah is showing me, I think you can grow very well in your science and very well in your relationship with Allah. If, however, you're trying to prove that the Quran is true, you're gonna fail in both. Because even the issue of the embryo, or even the issue of the splitting of the seas, where you have the salt water and the fresh water, and then people show memes, hey, look, here it is in the Quran. Then what happens is you're forgetting the fact that those are interpretations of text. Did the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, see those eyes about the embryo as telling them about the embryo? Most people don't have an answer for that question. So Desmond Washington, I think you asked a very, very profound question, but the simple answer is yes. Any other questions about anything at all? No other questions.
All right. I think that is it. Thank you so much, Dr. Mozaffar. We really appreciate you coming out and spending your time with us and
Absolutely, it's my honor.
helping us grow as Muslims and just people in general.
Absolutely.
But, guys,
If I can, I was going to say, if I can help with anything else, it's very easy to find me. Just Google Muslim Chaplain Loyola, and you can find my contact